At the Qingchuangkong Air Base in central Taiwan, Major Chen Zhilong revs the engines on his fighter, preparing to respond to an attack from mainland China. This is only a drill, but it's a reminder that the political conflict between Taiwan and China, the legacy of the Chinese Civil War 7 decades ago, remains unresolved, and, given long-standing U.S. support for Taiwan, still makes the Taiwan Strait a potentially dangerous flashpoint.
It is the one place in which, if things go very wrong, the U.S. can be involved in a shooting war with China.
At the moment, that notion seems far-fetched. Relations between Taiwan and the mainland are better now than they've ever been, bolstered by a dramatic increase in economic ties, and a government in Taipei, headed by President Ying-jeou, that has backed off the talk of an independent Taiwan, which fueled a sharp increase in tension between Taiwan and Beijing under Ma's predecessor, Chen Shui-bian.
We want to institutionalize the cross-strait interaction so that gradually the two sides can interchange, can interact with each other in a way a normal economic entities do.
Strategically, the cross-strait situation is in the best shape it's been in many years. The Ying-jeou administration has sought to build bridges across the strait to the mainland with the explicit objective of reducing tensions and, in many ways, enhancing interdependence across the strait.
Ying-jeou's policy is much more stable, much more responsible and predictable. So you can trust him, and you can do business with him in a trustful way.
Preoccupied with Afghanistan, the Middle East, and the economy,
because the health of our economy depends in part on what we do right now.
The Obama administration has supported Ma's moves.
The steps that the Ma government has taken to improve relations with the mainland are very welcomed by the U.S. government. They have reduced the level of tension. They have reduced the likelihood of miscalculation and misunderstanding, and therefore reduced the likelihood of some incident leading to confrontation and even potentially conflict.
But even with the thaw, the most intractable issues between Taiwan and China are still unresolved.
The bottom line for cross-strait relations is that the PRC still really wants unification for real, and Taiwanese have no interest in unification for real.
Indeed, opinion polls in Taiwan show that nearly 2/3 of the population support maintaining the status quo. Only a tiny minority favor unification.
The tough issues are all in the future. They have not yet addressed the military balance or military confidence building measures. They certainly have not begun to discuss any kind of political unification.
The biggest question is the military balance, which has shifted dramatically.
The balance certainly is obviously tipping off to mainland China in terms of their military capabilities. It is continuously to be so for a number of years already. And there's no sign that China is stopping their progress and modernization.
U.S. and Taiwan officials say China now has roughly 1,500 missiles targeted at the island. In purely military terms, that's a game changer. In the event of a conflict, Beijing would be able to knock out Taiwan's runways, pin down its air force, and take effective control of the air.
Taiwan, for many years, had air superiority and is rapidly losing that superiority.
Under such circumstances, American and Taiwanese military planners acknowledge the U.S. would have to come to the rescue.
The important thing is for Taiwan to have confidence, the will to fight, and to have the capability to defend itself for a period of time until forces from the United States, if the United States made a decision to come to Taiwan's help, were able to get here. And I think that's really the key.
In 1996, when China fired missiles towards Taiwan, President Clinton deployed 2 U.S. aircraft carriers in the Western Pacific. And Beijing backed off. But China's breakneck military modernization has given the mainland an increasing ability to deter or delay any possible U.S. military intervention.
They possess the capability of anti-access or area denial military capabilities, focusing on preventing outside military power to intervene possible conflict in Taiwan Strait area, so that they can do whatever they can to achieve their objectives.
China is developing anti-carrier missiles, ballistic missiles that can hit carriers, so it's trying to push the United States further and further back off Taiwan. And so the long and the short of it is, militarily, it's becoming harder and harder and more costly to defend Taiwan.
And that problem has become more acute because the equipment, budget, and caliber of Taiwan's armed forces is deteriorating as the mainland's military grows stronger. Taiwan's Navy has just 4 submarines. 2 of them date from World War II. Its Air Force depends on obsolete U.S. F-5s, a locally built fighter called the IDF, some aging French Mirage jets, and American F-16s provided in 1992.
Our Navy and Air Force, some of them are more than 2 decades. It's difficult to find the spare parts to fit in there and to support them. And it's costly, because the old systems, they don't have any kind of backup systems to maintain their operation.
Under the Taiwan Relations Act, passed by the U.S. Congress after Washington and Beijing established diplomatic ties in 1979, the United States pledged to continue to sell weapons to enable Taiwan to defend itself. From the beginning, Beijing has bitterly objected. Today, U.S. arms sales to Taiwan remain one of the biggest sore points in Sino-American relations.
Without, resolution of this arms sales issue, China can be very, very angry toward the United States.
Even with the dramatic improvement in Taiwan-China relations, President Ma asked the U.S. to provide the latest generation of F-16s, the so-called C and D models.
They are purchased to really replace the aging items we have in our arsenal. So I think this is very important for the 2 sides of the Taiwan Strait and the United States to understand. A right military balance across Taiwan Strait is vital to peace and stability.
Continued U.S. arms sales are essential for him to have the confidence and for his people to have the confidence for negotiations with the mainland to go forward.
But the Obama administration, trying to avoid a crisis with Beijing while not abandoning Taiwan altogether, rebuffed President Ma's request, offering instead to modernize the island's existing fleet of F-16s.
So you got to find a way to calibrate your policies so that the deterrent is maintained and that the message is clear, but you're not overplaying to the point where you really force the Chinese to get really hot. And I think the decision to go with an upgrade of an existing system that is very capable, I mean, it's not a militarily insignificant improvement, rather than something that has a lot more symbolic challenge behind it, that makes sense to me.
But the decision not to provide new F-16s upset Taiwan and its American supporters.
Well, I think the blow is twofold. It's a political blow because it's a statement of tepid support from the United States, not fully supporting their defense needs, but there's a military consequence as well. Let's say that the environment changes even subtly between the 2 sides of the strait. I think that the Chinese feel as though they have growing leverage because of their military capability, and this will only speak to that further.
The move also led Taiwan's friends in the U.S. Congress to introduce legislation designed to force the Obama administration to sell new F-16s.
With over 1,600 missiles pointed directly across the Taiwan Strait, Taiwan needs the means to defend itself from the threats and intimidations. Taiwan needs the next generation of F-16 fighters now in order to protect its skies.
At the same time, however, and for the first time, some respected former officials, high-ranking military officers, and scholars have been making a contrary argument that weapon sales to Taiwan are counterproductive, and given the importance of maintaining a good relationship with Beijing, the U.S. should rethink the Taiwan Relations Act. Among those voices, former U.S. Ambassador to China James Prior and former Vice Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral William Owens.
The special relationship that has grown in Taiwan and the mainland is very different now. There's not been a single review of that legislation. We need to do that, and the implementation of it might be keyed to the fact that China is not in a belligerent stance. And as long as they stay that way, then perhaps we should hold back for a while on arms sales to Taiwan.
Our strategic and economic interests are going up and up with the PRC. There are limits to how important Taiwan can be to us in these economic and strategic terms. And the PRC is building up more and more military, which means their capacity to achieve their objectives is going up. So if the United States over time will be asked to spend more and more of its treasure and resource and credibility in providing a security guarantee to a Taiwan that is of relatively less and less importance to the United States. And that's a political calculus that over the long term, which the long term might be 10, 20, 30 years, becomes less and less sustainable.
Amid all the uncertainty, Taiwan is gearing up for a presidential election next January, with Ma Ying-jeou's mainland policy a central issue. The opposition Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, has been fiercely critical.
The next DPP administration, when dealing with the China issue, will be using a new approach.
Given the ongoing military threat as well as territorial intentions, we feel we should proceed much more cautiously. And Ma Ying-jeou, from our party's perspective, most of our supporters feel that he is embracing China at the cost of Taiwan's sovereignty, dignity, and to some extent our democracy.
If DPP candidate Tsai Ing-wen wins, many observers fear a return to the tensions that marked the years when the previous DPP president, Chen Shui-bian, was in power. Joseph Wu was the Chen administration's envoy to the U.S.
But if the DPP has a chance to make a comeback in 2012, one of the fear we have is that maybe the Chinese government's going to repeat what it was trying to do to Taiwan in 2000 and 2004, just completely ignore Taiwan's goodwill gestures or try to suffocate Taiwan's international participation or to step up military threat against Taiwan.
It's a concern that at least some in Washington share. In a controversial comment, one unnamed senior American official told the newspaper The Financial Times that the DPP candidate Tsai Ing-wen left the U.S. with, quote, distinct doubts about whether she is both willing and able to continue the stability in cross-straits relations the region has enjoyed in recent years. But even if Ma Ying-jeou wins a second term, as Beijing clearly hopes, there's concern that China may increase its pressure for political concessions that Ma will find impossible to make.
If, say, in the next election and you come back and say to me, sorry, I'm not going to do anything on the political side. You know, economics is economics, politics is politics. I have my own domestic base to cover. And that, I think, is probably the worst scenario for the Chinese leadership in Beijing.
It's not only Taiwan, though, that's facing a leadership transition in 2012. Chinese President Hu Jintao is due to step down next year, with Xi Jinping, a former provincial leader, expected to replace him. In the run-up to the transition, political tensions have been rising in the mainland, fueled not only by jockeying for power, but by public anger over inflation, corruption, and unaffordable housing. With the Chinese army playing an increasingly important domestic political role, Beijing has also taken a much more assertive international posture, sparking questions about how long it may be willing to display patience on the Taiwan issue.
Any kind of leadership change is, in some sense, troublesome. This always makes everyone more conservative about the Taiwan issues.
That's a very tough question, how patient they are. Unification is one of the pillars of the party. So if you let that separate province, whatever you call it internationally, stay there for 60 years like a de facto, not de jure, de facto independence, and the citizens, some citizens may lose their confidence in the current government.
But some argue that the thaw with Taiwan is one of President Hu Jintao's most important legacies, and he has strong reason to preserve it.
Hu Jintao, I think most people would say on Taiwan, his policy has moved the right direction. So his incentives is to preserve that unambiguously positive legacy.
And yet nationalism, heightened by Beijing's economic and military clout and a growing perception of American decline, is an increasingly potent force in China.
They have this nationalistic, very active internet population and citizenry who are preventing them from having a smart foreign policy because they get hammered if they look weak.
After the F-16 announcement, the Beijing newspaper Global Times, which is affiliated with the official People's Daily, declared that China should not rule out, quote, seeking revenge on both the U.S. and Taiwan if new arms sales went ahead. In practice, though, Beijing has done little more than threaten to curtail Sino-American military exchanges, the same response it's had to previous U.S. arms sales. And in many ways, the whole cross-straits arms race is much more about each side using weapons to gain diplomatic leverage and strengthen its bargaining position. Yet with China, Taiwan, and the U.S. all facing uncertain political transitions in 2012 and the key issues between Beijing and Taipei still unresolved, this small island 90 miles off the Chinese coast will remain not just an economic success story, but a continuing source of tension and uncertainty in Northeast Asia.